talking for 5 minutes, and yeah, I thought it's the microphone was on. All right. There was a question about the third assignment. Yes, please feel free.
Вот я хотела спросить, оформлять какие-то вот poverty rate в виде переменной, где писать gen, или в виде скаляра?
Как вам удобнее? Как вам удобнее, как вам кажется проще? Вы можете вообще просто в этом комментарии написать, да, там.
А оформлять промежуточные столбцы, их оставлять или нужно удалять все?
Опять же, как вам... Я в конце, да, хочу только do файл посмотреть, то есть только код. И как вам удобно. Если вам удобно удалять, удаляете. Если вы не хотите удалять, оставляете.
Хорошо. То есть все должно быть оформлено текстом?
Вот этим do файлом, да. Кодом и комментарием к нему.
Хорошо, спасибо.
All right. Coming back to the course. I repeat my introduction the second time. In this course, we talked mostly about how to measure development. Yeah, what makes countries poor, what makes countries rich. What are poor countries, what are rich countries. But we didn't talk about the reasons. Yeah, like we didn't say like much why are countries poor. We said like what are the characteristics of a poor country. That was it. We didn't really talk about the reasons, and the only part of our course that dealt with this a bit was the solo model. You remember solo model? It had something to do with like why are countries poor, and today we'll have something more empirical. So because solo model is like this big theoretical chunk, today we'll talk about empirics, and basically we'll try to empirically see what factors can affect development. We start with this paper by Asimoglu, Johnson, Robinson, the thing we started at the lecture. And you remember that, or maybe you know, that if we look at the poor countries now, they might have something in common. All of them have some common characteristic. And it's always easy to have one common characteristic, yeah, that you can find, you can analyze, and if it's one reason, yeah, like maybe some universal solutions can be possible. That would be cool, yeah, like we like this kind of standardization. However, of course, there is no one reason, but some reasons are common for like more larger number of countries. And we start with this paper of colonial origin of comparative development, which tells us that, all right, if we look at the poor countries of today, this paper was written in 2000, but nothing has changed since then. And if we say like, all right, what do these poor countries of today, also in 2020, have in common? And maybe many of them are have some colonial background. Yeah, they used to be colonies of European nations at some point. All right, that is probably something to consider, something to analyze. However, if we look at the list of colonies, there are very, very kind of bad examples of development, but at the same time, here we have very, very rich countries, yeah, like Singapore, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, USA. So these countries are also ex-colonies, but at the same time they made it and they're super rich. Why is it the case? We use log of GDP to have like normalization, yeah, because the difference between GDP per capita GDP of US and say Congo will be actually much larger than on the graph. It will see like it will look very differently. So we normally use logs for normalization of variables. Yes, like so log transformation basically normalizes, or like close to normalizes. So Hong Kong it's part of China now, but you you don't know. It's my childhood. So Hong Kong was transferred to China in the 1998, I think. Before it was part of the UK. So it is the UK colony, one of the last colonies. And when China became big enough, they said like, all right, come on, this is our land, and we're kind of not a little country to kind of have our territories occupied by the UK. And so then the UK said like, all right, we give you back your Hong Kong and leave. Yeah, so I mean, it just shows us like, yeah, that like even now, yeah, like statistics for Hong Kong is published separately quite often because it's this special administrative district. Yeah, so yeah, it's kind of part of China officially, but yeah, de facto it's a bit independent. So in 2001, especially, yeah, like now it's so. Yeah, and these are only colonies. So these are only colonies, and right, we can say that maybe there's something else besides colonial experience. And what the authors look at is this. It's called average risk, expropriation risk, and actually it's protection against this. So basically, if it's 10 here, it means good protection against expropriation, and 4 is actually low protection against expropriation. I see like that this institutional quality. So if institutions are good, your country is rich, and if institutions are poor, your country is poor. That's something to consider, and probably there are many explanations for that. Like, why does it happen? Here we can say like, all right, maybe this has something to do with the institutions. However, so like the question, does this protection of private property lead to rich economies? We cannot say for sure, because we can say like, all right, we have counter argument. Rich countries, so like say Canada is rich. And they can afford good institutions. Yeah, so maybe Canadians are just rich and they can finance police, they can find courts, and they can pay for good institutions. Yeah, while people in say Kenya here are poor and they cannot finance good institutions. So we look at this correlation. This is a correlation. We cannot say what is cause and what is an effect. Yeah, like we don't know. We cannot argue this. We cannot find this econometrically. However, then they say like, all right, but why these institutions were formed, and they were formed this way and not another? And they come up with this nice story about settler mortality. So yeah, like now we go back to like this age of discoveries, like let's say 16th century, and we remember that in 16th century, colonization, this migration, was a very risky business. Yeah, so it was super dangerous to travel overseas, and when you reach this place, yeah, like you didn't have any medicine, yeah, like there was no medicine. So like train was more efficient, yeah, than medicine of the like 16th century. And then if people came to countries like Mali or Nigeria, there very fast they realized that mortality is very high. So people were dying from diseases, people were dying from like I don't know, just weather. It was super warm. They were killed by animals, yeah, like snakes, mosquitoes that transfer malaria, and so on and so on. So it was super dangerous. People died very often, and very soon people realized that, like, all right, we don't want to live here. We don't want to stay here. We already came from far. It's super dangerous. And they said, like, all right, maybe we have to just grab everything we see, everything valuable we see, and leave. And that kind of created these extractive institutions here. So basically, people for ages were not caring, for example, about property rights of the locals. You don't treat them as people because you see them as slaves. Of course, you don't enforce property rights of them. And then you say, like, all right, here we formed bad institutions. However, if you look at these US, Canada, New Zealand, and so on, the settler mortality was very low. The people didn't die there often because they came, say, like, imagine they came to the North America and they said, like, all right, climate is good, a lot of fertile land, locals are not very hostile, and technologically not very advanced. So here it tells us that this settler mortality was highest in Mali, Nigeria, and Gambia. This is where the settler mortality was the highest. And this protection against expropriation risk maybe originates from the fact that people, so settler mortality is basically how many colonizers, what was the share of them that died. And like if many people who came from Europe died, they said, like, all right, we don't want to stay here. We leave as fast as possible, take everything we can, and leave. However, in, say, like North America, they didn't die, and they said, like, all right, we want to live here. We want to have kids here because it's safe, it's nice, land is kind of available. So, and of course, when people were moving from Europe, they said, like, all right, we want the same institutions as back home, because, like, already, for example, in England, at this time, private property was well enforced. So, like, you couldn't just take a pig from your neighbor. No, it was protected by law. And people who wanted to settle down, they said, like, all right, we want the same laws in our society here as back home. Yeah. While in Africa, they said, like, all right, we don't treat these people that who live here as people in the end. Yeah, like they are slaves. We don't care about their rights. Well, here in North America, it's like, all right, it's us. We want good institutions for us. And that resulted that over ages, it still has an effect, this settler mortality, on this expropriation risk. Again, it's protection against expropriation. So it's not only about environment per se, but like, yeah, how people reacted to this environment. So like if people could survive, if people could see these places as the place they wanted to live, they wanted to stay, and they wanted to build institutions that were good. Yeah, so here they put institutions that laws that protected private property and so on. And this is like even seen now, like in the end of 20th century. That's the point. Like these laws, I think laws in, for example, Mali are also quite alright. but they're not enforced. Yeah, like there is basically society also contributes to this, like not tolerating the laws. Yeah, like while in I don't know, I don't think in New Zealand, for example, police is very, is very aggressive and so on. So people are already like in New Zealand already kind of themselves, they tolerate these things, while in Africa it kind of takes a while. Yes. Here is no Russia because like it's not colonial story. Like, all right. And now we say like, all right, we need this for economic growth. So like, if you remember Solo model, why do we need good property rights? Why property rights are important for development? All right. So if you remember, Solo model has a very clear kind of recipe for development. It tells us that you just need to save more, and the more you save, the faster you grow. And imagine if your private property is not safe. You don't really invest. Because like you invest, and the next week some gangsters come, expropriate your plant that you built, and that's it. Yeah, like you don't really want to lose your money, so you don't invest in this country if you feel that these things are possible. And then if we look at this regression table, and remember each column is one regression equation, and here we say like, all right, protection against expropriation. Yeah, so like if this protection against expropriation is high, your GDP per capita is also high. Yeah, that's very intuitive. We see it's positive, significant coefficient. So like in the brackets we have standard errors. Remember, standard error that is like at least 2 times smaller than the coefficient is good. Here it's even more than 10 times, so it's super significant. And it's like, all right, this is what happens. So this kind of effect holds. So we need institutions for development. We need institutions for income. And we know that they were formed, most likely, according to this experience, colonial experience of a country. And we see like that this protection against expropriation, no, it's no natural disasters. Yeah, so like no natural disasters. It's only about like society, how society works. And we know that in these societies, people just tolerate private property. All right, and we see like that if we look at this settler mortality, so again, how often colonizers were dying, we see that this is a negative and significant effect, meaning that like the more settlers were dying, the lower we have property rights secured nowadays. Yeah, so like, and this kind of comes through ages, the very long kind of process has like the effect now. All right, this is kind of a starting point. Yeah, we say like, all right, we need to install better institutions. That's okay. The amount of observations is not very big. It's like 60, but meaning that actually, we can compare indicators here. Like if number of observations differs a bit, it's fine. We just look at this we don't compare the numbers between themselves. Yeah, like we just look if they're kind of robust, meaning like that they don't change much if we change something in the regression specification. And normally, the smaller observations you have, the harder it is for you to fit a regression line. Like if you have like 63 observations and you have something very significant, it means that this relationship is quite strong. Like, because out of like hundreds of observations, it's always possible to fit something in. The R-squared tells us what's the share of deviations from the mean. So deviations here from from the mean average protection against expropriation. What's the share of these deviations that we can explain? Yeah, because we cannot explain all of them. I don't know, maybe one country, yeah, like is super weird in culture. They have particular culture of hating private property, for example. Yeah, we cannot include everything in the regression. And here it shows us like, it's not the dispersion, it shows us like what share of these deviations we are able to explain. So it tells us, all right, we explain here, for example, at 20% of the total deviations from the average. Yeah, we can explain with these components. All right. So now we see, all right, colonial experience maybe has something to do. What can we do now about it? Like, yeah, maybe help these countries to invest more into this, like, into preserving property rights, and just help them with, like, I don't know, courts, police, and everything else will happen kind of naturally. Like people will start investing and so on. All right, something that we can try to do. However, is it the only thing that prevents countries from development? Because we see, like, for example, 27% of deviations from the mean in this average protection risk is explained by our model, but like 70% are not explained. 70% come from other factors. So there are many other stories that we can think about. And now we move to the next paper. It's not it's not about institutions now, it's directly about income. And this is even older paper, but this is like super fundamental one. The Africa's Growth Tragedy by Easterly and Levine, and it's like from 1997. And here, what they look at, they say like, all right, we know that Africa, or like some countries, are actually very prone to conflict. Because you know that like even nowadays, we see civil wars happening in Africa quite often. Right? And then they came up with this idea of ethno-linguistic fractionalization. That sounds complicated, but it's quite simple. So basically, ethno-linguistic fractionalization, this index, shows us what are the chances that two random people, that we select randomly, both of them, that they will belong to different ethnicities. And so imagine you go to the street and you ask two random people, what is your ethnicity? Like, what is your kind of ethnic characteristic? And for example, here we see that in Tanzania it's 93%. So basically, if you pick up two random people in Tanzania with a probability of 93%, we can say that they will belong to different ethnic groups. Yeah, so this is a very high ethnic diversity in Tanzania. While if you go to Japan, here, it tells us that if you select two random people in Japan, with a probability of 99%, 99%, two people you pick up on the street will be Japanese. So it's not very ethnically diverse country. Because everybody is Japanese, they all speak the same language. And probably it means that they're less likely to engage into conflicts, kind of big, serious conflicts, because they have more kind of homogeneous culture. They cannot form groups, these kind of resistance groups, that fast or like that easily. Because imagine if you have to share some resources, like in Africa, you have to fight for resources because like they are very, very scarce. And then you basically, who do you normally join with? You say like, all right, people, we are the same tribe, we speak the same language, we share the same kind of mythology and so on, and let's join together and try to kind of oppose to other tribes. And this is what happens. And here we can see that, all right, this ethnically fractionalized country, it could depend on the level of migration, yes. However, if we think about like these countries here, like the most ethnically fractionalized, it could be that it doesn't seem that like many people migrate into these countries. Yeah, like I don't think somebody wants to migrate to so Zaire is Congo, for example. Yeah, like I think it's Republic of Congo or DR Congo, one of those two, something of Congo. I don't think many people want to go to Congo. Yeah, so actually this story can only amplify it. Yeah, so we kind of estimate only the lower bound because I don't think this is due to migration. So like the only thing that can happen, maybe some groups want to get away and not new groups are coming in. All right, and then we can say like maybe this is because these populations are different, and there is no particular reason for that. It's only because it just happened this way that Africa is full of many ethnicities, and the countries as they are now, they were formed not kind of naturally. Yeah. So for example, in like look at Russia, like Russia was formed because there was like this. It was also like first like union of tribes. You remember, like Поляне, Древляне. It was kind of formed. These countries were formed by these by colonial powers. Yeah. And then you see like, all right, maybe these countries' national borders were artificially created. Yeah, like it was created not because these were like groups of people united like they wanted to be united, but because the Europeans did it. Europeans kind of combined them this way. All right. So Germany is I think it's a bit old data. I think now maybe fractionalization is a bit higher, but at the same time, you still see that, for example, in Russia, this thing is about like 0.3, I guess, like 30%, and it's also like not very high because if you go on the street here, like 80% of people will be Russian. So like you have to like search for these ethnic minorities. So like we have one very big dominant group and the rest are kind of minorities. While in Tanzania, you cannot say what is majority ethnically. They all are different and in equal kind of proportions. So they have like a lot of tribes, a lot of ethnicities, and they all are numerous and kind of equally large. Yes, and Japan, for example, yeah, of course, Japan cannot have any national conflict. They can have like other conflicts, yeah, like on other reasons, but not in terms of on the background of ethnicity, yeah, because like they're all Japanese, like who they want to join with. Yes, and then here we say like, all right, how does this affect development? And if we go to this regression table here, yeah. It's the GDP. Yeah, so GDP growth, and this is a long table, and we are not very interested in the first part. And in the second thing, we see that like maybe this effect of ethnicity comes through, for example, through conflict, as I told you. Like it provokes conflict, that's why people kind of fight and then grow fast. And it can have effect on many things. For example, on schooling. Yeah, like what if schooling is lower if we have ethnic tensions? We see like that generally schooling, remember, dependent variable is GDP growth. We see like, all right, GDP growth is positively affected by schooling. Not a surprise. It's negatively affected by assassinations. Yeah. So if you have a lot of politically motivated murders, of course, this is not good for development because the government cannot implement kind of steady policy because every time something happens, you know, like the guy who was a minister had some plans and then he cannot implement them because he was just killed. So this is bad. Financial debt. Financial debt shows like how well developed your financial system is. So if it's good, you grow faster. Black market premium shows how attractive it is basically to go illegal. And of course, if it's attractive, it's not good for your country. Yeah, like you want to have no illegal activities. So the higher the black market, the slower is your growth. All right. Fiscal surplus to GDP, yeah, it shows how well endowed financially your government is. Yeah, the more money the government has, the better they can implement some policies and so on. Telephones per worker. So telephones per worker are a good thing because like it's just infrastructure. All right. Why do they have like missing cells here? Basically, in the first regression, we include only log of schooling. In the second column, we say like, all right, we include log of schooling and assassinations. In the third column, they say like we include all of them plus all other things. And in the fourth, they also include this phones and so. Yeah, maybe now it's not very illustrative. I agree. It's 1997. Then maybe phones were more important. However, yeah, it's still it's just like, you know, like it's not about really phones. It's about the infrastructure. Yeah. So now maybe they have phones, but they don't have like other. And I think broadband internet, for example, is well developed. So they would have like other kind of infrastructural problems. It's not only about that we want to tie together, we just do this gradually, these variables, and we see like that the effect, for example, of schooling is robust, so it doesn't change if we include, for example, assassinations and the other things. So you see like it's quite stable, it doesn't change much. That's good. So it means that this log of schooling alone has something to do with development, and it's especially visible if we compare it with ethnicity. So, for example, here, ethnicity still like has a negative effect on GDP growth, significant, and it's not only due to assassinations. So assassinations is basically one story, ethnic diversity is another one. So it's not only about conflicts, it's something else that makes development slower if you have diverse society. So that's why we do this gradually, and it's like, all right. So it's not only because people fight too much. No, there are some kind of more kind of deeper reasons for it. Right, the questions. All right, yeah, about taxes, yeah, like, like Russia is a bit different, yeah, like different country to study, especially like I'm very bad to advocate these things, but like Russia is kind of it's well developed. Yeah, it's a very well developed country. We have different standards, and of course we don't have to compare Russia with like African countries. Yeah? Like we are on the different level. We have like other reasons to other factors because we are an established state that can have like they can solve problems ourselves, yeah, and don't need much development literature. We all know one problem to solve, and then like everybody will start living much better. All right, so here we see like, all right, this effect of ethnic fractionalization is robust, it's stable, it's negative, even if we control for assassinations, financial death, all these things. So it's basically not, this effect comes not through these things, but something else. So even per se, ethnicity has effect on GDP. And this is kind of interesting. What are these things? If it's not conflict, if it's not education, if it's not financial stability. So these are explanatory variables with independent variables, and they all try to explain GDP per capita. They do explain it to an extent, but we still have to consider something else. Yes, like we cannot explain it completely. We'll never be able, but we see that now in this thing, this ethno-linguistic fractionalization has a negative effect on growth. All right, that's something to consider. But what can we do with this? Yeah, like what can we do with this? We cannot tell people like, all right, you have to integrate and so on. So the header here was this first part of the table is so it's growth of capital. Oh, sorry, growth of per capita real GDP. All right. So, something else besides conflicts can affect growth. So, what can we do with this? And maybe if we understand this a bit better, why does it happen this way? Maybe we'll be able to understand things. We'll come with like with some explanations. Now we refer to something much newer, like 2013. Yeah, so the government can try to do something, but we have to understand what can they do. Like what can they do? they just say like, all right, people from different tribes, you should like form kind of this diverse marriages, maybe, but maybe it's also like we need to understand why ethnicity has effect on growth, because it's like it's not only through conflict, not through like education, something else. So ethnicity alone can have an effect on growth, and that's what this paper tries to analyze. And this is this paper by Ashraf and Galore, Out of Africa Hypothesis. So Out of Africa Hypothesis is a very, it's completely not economic concept. So and here they try to measure it to explain economic differences, like income differences, with something that's called heterozygosity. So heterozygosity is actually genetic diversity of your country. And so how basically, you know, like that each person has like a set of like the genetic profile of each person is combined of like several elements, yeah? like say like 40 different genes, which all of them work as kind of bricks, like as a toy bricks. And in the whole nation, for example, in Russia, we have like, let's say, I'm making up the numbers, we have like 200 bricks normally available. Yeah, like variety of these bricks is kind of limited to 200. Each person has like only random 40 out of these 200. Yeah, so we have some genetic variety. And imagine that the closer you are to East Africa, the larger, this genome. So the larger is this genetic variety. So like people in Africa, societies in Africa, honestly, I don't know which countries are here. These are actually 53. Yes, there are some Russian ethnicities here. 53 ethnic groups from this panel about genetic diversity. I'll explain it in a second. And we see that basically that people in Africa are genetically more diverse genetically than people say in Americas, like in Latin America, for example. This means that, for example, in African society of, let's say, Ethiopia, inside the country, they have like 50,000 these unique genes. Yes, like these bricks that compose the whole genome of a human. While in Americas, they have like 20. I'm making the numbers up, but here, this number is much smaller than here. Right, now the question, why do you think we look at the distance from East Africa? What does it have to do with genes and distance from East Africa? First of all, distance from Africa, from East Africa particularly, and why does it have something to do with genes? So maybe it has something to do with like East Africa in particular. Why is East Africa kind of famous of? All right, this is not a very intuitive question. I agree, and this is actually has something to do with like how or where people are coming from, people as species, yeah. And this is a very nice theory out of Africa hypothesis. It's quite well proved now that we all have one common ancestor. Like we as humans, we all come from the same person. We don't know if it was the person created by God or if it was the evolution. It's kind of, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, like it doesn't really matter because here, surprisingly, both religion and science, they say the same thing. We all come from one person. So this, we really have this biological Adam. So one guy who is our common ancestor. So it's proved now. And then it's like the question, like what do you want to believe, if it was like created by superpowers or if it was just evolution. Oh, we all come from the same person, and this person appeared in East Africa, so like around Addis Ababa, so like somewhere in Ethiopia. And then imagine, so like all genetic material that we have, we inherited from our parents. So like, and then our parents inherited from their parents, and so on and so on. So like all these genetic bricks that we have now are coming from Addis Ababa. Like they're coming from Addis Ababa, at some point it was too kind of crowded in Addis Ababa, and they said like, all right, we want to leave, and some people left to Cairo, and everything they took with them, like because people didn't have much. Yes, I'll come to the Red Crosses soon. As people left from East Africa, they were going. They were taking only a limited amount of genes with them. Yeah, like not all genetic material, because like people here had all these genetic materials, but if you leave, you carry only these genes that you have already, because they lost connection to these people. Yeah, so they couldn't exchange genetic material with them, and of course, genetic variety became smaller. And people migrated to Cairo. Then at some point, people said like, all right, we leave from Cairo, we leave from here. And some people went to like Scotland, some people went to Asia, and the kind of the toughest ones went even to South America. Yeah, that's a long way to go. And the further they were going, because this never happened there like in one generation, it took like ages. And the further they were going away from East Africa, the less the more genetic information was gone. Because simply, yeah, like if you leave, you exchange only like with your genes with only like a limited number of people. No, it's only about like it's migration by foot away from Africa, and these little crosses, they show us where now kind of unique populations can be found. So this is some ethnic groups included in this panel, and these crosses, they show, for example, where the isolated tribes live. For example, this is something I might be wrong, but like I think this is something like the ethnicity called Chukchi. Yeah, so like because you know that they are isolated from the rest of population, so it's kind of the society that is preserved genetically. It's kind of a bit conserved in terms of genetic information because they were living separately and didn't exchange genes with people. For example, if you take an average Russian person, we know that everybody has genes from like West Europe to East Asia, because like we have such a huge genetic such a huge ethnic variety here. Yeah? Like we all have like bloods of different ethnic groups. Here they look at ethnic groups that are kind of more homogeneous, that didn't exchange genetic material with others. All right. So migration is actually moving somewhere. Moving somewhere, we don't say like if it's away or, sorry, it's migration is movement. We don't say if it's away from somewhere or to somewhere. We just say like, we migrate, we move. In Australia, for example, there is no cross, I think, because nobody knows where Australians actually, like this, Aborigines actually come from. So that's not clear if they came from, like, say, Malaysia or somewhere else. So maybe they are not kind of this kind of pure population. Yeah, maybe they have like they exchanged some genes with someone. So they were not isolated population, so to say. All right. So, and now we see like the further you are from East Africa by foot, yeah, like not by land, not by air, the more genetically diverse you are. Yeah, so like your society is genetically diverse. And if we look at the regression table, and here we have only 21 observations, so it was hard to find data both on genetic diversity, and we also needed this population density in 1500. Doesn't we have an idea why do we have to care about population density in 1500? What does it measure? So like it measures something, not only like how many people live on the square kilometer, but it can tell us about something else. It can tell us about something economic actually, and not only migration. All right. So population density in 1500. Yeah. Imagine 1500. Yeah, the age 1500. It's super. Yeah. Yes. Migration. Oh, sorry. No. No, it's not about like discovery of America. No, it's just something that like happened already a long time after this migration out of Africa. But at the same time, at this time, the world wasn't yet global. So, for example, yeah, in 1500, we know that we were not that globalized. So, for example, people from, say, like Spain, they were mostly, maybe Spain is not a good example. Let's say in France, they were all mainly French, like this, and like descendants of these Celtic tribes, and not something else. Yeah, well, now if you go to France, or like even 100 years ago, they have like much more genetic variety. Yeah, like Moroccans came, the Algerians came, some people from Africa came, they all exchanged genes and so on. So at this time, societies were kind of more isolated yet. And at the same time, we see that this population density is the measure of kind of income back in the days. Why does it measure income? Because imagine in 1500, what was the main sector of economy? Yeah, agriculture. So because people, I'll come to the fixed effects in a second. Yeah, and they say like, all right, if we have agriculture as the main sector of economy, yeah, like there were no other sectors. Yeah, like they didn't have like R&D or there were no graphic designers, yeah, something like this. So basically, economic success was the fact that you don't starve. Yeah, like if you don't starve, you're actually kind of economically very successful. And if your society, you can feed many people and not all of your kids die of hunger and some survive, it already means that you are kind of doing economically very well in 1500. Yeah. And of course, the more people you can feed, the better you kind of are economically, the higher your population density. So because more people survive. And here we see that like this observed diversity, this genetic diversity, has positive effect on this population density, but interestingly, until some point. So this observed diversity squared has negative coefficient. So we basically have this, remember regression equation, this is our x, and this is x squared with the minus actual coefficient. How does it look like on the graph? What's the shape of this function? If it's minus x squared plus x, how does it look like on the graph? How do we call this shape of a function? You know this shape. Exactly. It's a parabola. So it's an inverse U shape. It's a parabola, downward shaping, and tells us that there is some optimal diversity that maximizes population density, 1500. So everything until this point, until like 683, is positive for development, but afterwards it goes down. Why is it the case? We will try to explain now. Right, continent fixed effects. Fixed effects are actually dummy variables. You remember, dummy variable is binary variable, so like 0 or 1, and it's equal to 1. For example, if your country, if your population is located in one particular continent. So for example, if your population is lies in Europe, it will be equal to 1 for example, it will be equal to 1 for French, for Italians, for Spaniards, but it will be 0 for people living in Congo, in China, and somewhere else. Yeah, and this just to control for effects. So like maybe these characteristics of a continent have something to do. So maybe it's not about population density. So population density is not because of observed diversity, but it's because it was just Europe, which had like super cool climatic conditions, and these climatic conditions coincided with genetic diversity. No, it's something else. So like both are there. We control for this fact that this is Europe, but we still have something with this genetic diversity. It's still significant. All right, that's all. Yes, when we'll see that it holds until now. These effects hold until now. This is how it looks on the graph. This graphic representation of this, you see like 21 society. You see like there is one in Russia. So like one of these tribes actually in Russia. I don't know actually which one, because I think there are several of them. I think it's not only Chukchi, I think Saami are also in Russia, and so on. So like, but one tribes are also located in Russia. It's not that like general Russian population, no. We are kind of not very useful for that. And now we see like, all right, if we know that it affected GDP, this observed diversity, maybe we cannot measure genetic diversity of everybody. Like it's super expensive, it's super tough, you need the genetic tests and so on. What they do instead is like, all right, it has something to do with distance from East Africa. Because we know like the further you are from Africa, the more genetically kind of homogeneous your population is. And then it's like, all right, what if we take not genetics, but just distance? So how far you are from East Africa? And then they say like, all right, here we don't need these samples of genetics. We can look just at how far this society, this tribe was living, how far away from East Africa. And you see the same pattern. It's positive x and negative x squared. All right, the same story. And what's interesting, you see, like this is significant. Or if you look at aerial distance, so distance by air, this thing is not significant. So like there is no effect by just, so it's not about location. Yeah, like for example, if you're closer to equator, further from equator, no, it's not about that. So here minus coefficients, it's basically what the negative coefficient tells us, that the effect of migratory distance here from London, yeah, because it's from London, on population density was negative. Yeah, and negative, but like insignificant. So we can actually say like it's not different from zero, because like it's minus 40 plus minus 63, so it's 0. So you see, like it's not significant. So it's not about distance from, for example, other economic centers. Yeah, like Tokyo, London, Mexico. No. No, distance is really like kilometers from by foot. Yeah, so like what was the, because we know how people migrated more or less, yeah, like we know the routes, and then we can calculate, all right, if people could walk by foot from East Africa to these places, we can also see like how far they were away from London, Tokyo, Mexico, and so on. We see like, and these things have no effect. The same also aerial distance, so by plane, it doesn't really matter. It only matters by foot, because this is how people migrated. Yeah, like this is what was important, and not aerial distance. All right, and now if we know that we can use distance, only distance, to predict genetic diversity, we can look at income nowadays. So we basically take predicted diversity. Yeah, before we had observed, now we predict diversity with this distance. Yes, arable land is, yes, exactly, land for agriculture. Yeah, they do a lot of controls. So to see that these effects are kind of robust, they're not driven by something else. So like, all right, predicted diversity. They predict it with distance from East Africa, and they see like, all right, it's still the same pattern. First of all, this genetic diversity has positive effect on income, but at some point it becomes excessive, so it becomes too much diversity, and then it has negative effect on income already now in 2000. You see, like it was there 1500 in the year 1500, still there now, and you see like this diversity is ancestry adjusted, because we know, for example, now that, for example, Americans, the population of the US, yeah, they are not the ancestors of Native Americans. Yeah, like no, they're ancestors of like 40% English, 20% Irish, 10% Dutch, and so on and so on. So they account for this, where these people are coming from actually. For example, in Russia, it will also be accounted for. Yeah, like we are like 80% Russians, like 10 Mongolians, 10 Jewish, and so on. And then overall, we see that even controlling for this genetic diversity has an effect on income even now in 2000. It's something very, very fundamental. And now we have to try to understand why. Why is it the case? Why does genetic diversity has something to do with our income? And they come up like with a very simple explanation. Here. No. Here. They say like, all right, maybe it has something to do with trust on the first place. So they say like, all right, if your diversity, genetic diversity is high, your trust is lower. So basically you trust people less if you're genetically different from them. Yeah, because like imagine you are genetically similar to your parents. Yeah, like this is definitely the thing. No, it's not about like racial segregation. No, that's not, because in this, like you see, like that's the point. Because racial segregation will not help you very much. Because if you look now at ethnic fractionalization, you see like this coefficient is insignificant. You see like it's positive, but like it's insignificant. They evaluate trust with some games. With some games, it's connected with investment for sure. And they say like, all right, basically there are different. I think you'll have a subject called like behavioral economics. So there you can ask how do people measure trust, and there are like lots of games to see how people trust each other. And we see that diversity, this ethnic diversity. Oh, sorry, not ethnic. Sorry, genetic diversity has a negative effect on trust, and it's not through ethnicity. So it's not because people belong to different tribes, but even people in the same tribe don't trust each other very much if they are very genetically different. So if you are very close genetically to your parents, and most of the times we trust our parents, yeah? Like we don't think that they are trying to cheat on us. Yeah? Like it's mostly us kind of sometimes lying to them, but not the opposite way. Yes, and you see like why, for example, in Africa, development is at a low level. For example, one of them is that probably genetic diversity is very high. The people in the same tribe are very genetically different, and this is kind of results in a very low level of trust. At the same time, we need genetic diversity, because if you are genetically diverse, you can, like you can combine different types of character, for example. Yeah, like, and you can innovate faster, you can exchange ideas more efficiently, and then people kind of, like there are these synergy effects, and the people help each other to develop, and then we see, like, for example, the number of scientific articles per capita per year will be higher, you have higher genetic diversity. And then these two factors, they need some balance. Like if you are super genetically diverse, you are kind of very creative, but you cannot implement your decisions, your kind of inventions, because you don't trust everybody. Yeah, nobody will kind of give you money to realize your invention. And here, if you have very little genetic diversity, you are kind of all right. You trust people a lot, but you don't innovate much. You're too comfortable and so on. And that's why here, this graph, so roughly how development associates with this genetic diversity. And we see like that from here in Americas, people are too homogeneous genetically, while here in Africa, people are too heterogeneous. So here people don't trust each other enough, people don't innovate enough. And we need some kind of balance to maximize growth. So I think if you read this paper, you can find references on this kind of more reference on this from the literature on this negative and positive sides of genetic diversity. I don't think they come up with this idea themselves. They found it somewhere in the literature. And I think this is easy to measure. They just need these lab games, and then they measure trust, and so on. All right. I'll just finish now. Yeah, and they see now, basic tells us that maybe not only ethnicity, but more like something deeply rooted, so genetics, can also affect development. And this is already something that we also have to take into account. There are many things we can implement this. Because if you don't trust people, you can just again build institutions so that people have less reasons to mistrust each other and so on. But this is already you can build other stories and senses in these things. All right. So we just showed how different these things can be. They shouldn't be equal, but we need some balance, because we don't measure them on the same scale. Yeah, we say trust is one thing, so too much trust is. So there is never too much trust and never too much innovation. However, we know that if you have a lot of trust, quite likely you are not very innovative, and so on, and the opposite way. Right? Yeah. So I just showed you some examples what can we do in this field of development. Yeah. So it's a big field, and you can find many fascinating papers. These ones I just showed you. There is another one about climate. It's in LMS. I've uploaded it. And yeah, you can see this is a very interesting field, and it's not boring. Yeah, it's very diverse and interesting. Right. There was a question about assignment. Yes. Oh. All right. Let me check about Atkinson. Wait. Wait, but it cannot be negative. It cannot be negative. I'm just looking at the formula. For example, if yes, it shouldn't be negative, even for epsilon equal to 2, because I'll show you. I'll put you the slide now. And it might be. All right, let's see this together. Atkinson, yes. So this thing, this is the fraction. All right, and this is to the power of minus 1. Yes, it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be minus. It shouldn't be negative, I guess. Yes, because in the end you put it to the power of -1. Yes, I guess it shouldn't be this way. Yeah, so maybe there was some like mistake in the formulas. All right. Are there any other questions? If not, constituted. So here. It's basically where, like it's decomposable. So we say like we have to say which region is the most unequal. That's what constitutes to inequality means. So like basically which region is kind of the most unequal, which is the least, and so on. All right. And if there are no more questions, then thank you for your attention. It was kind of fun. Yes, that's it about this course. So have fun, good luck with your studies. And yeah, that's it from my side. Right. Goodbye.